being outlaws is in our DNA. That's what it is to be American. We're always the rebel opposition. We're always outnumbered. We're always hated. We're also feared and respected. I wouldn't have things any other way. I'm having a good time.
All right, and we're live. Welcome back to the Greene Tavern. Tonight we have a special guest on, Lee the Greater, Short Magazine SML Lee. Mr. Lee, would you like to give yourself an introduction?
Yeah, what's going on, fellas? Appreciate you guys having me on. Mostly just a Twitter shit poster, eager to be here, and just kind of regular guy into guns, right-wing politics, stuff like that.
Fantastic. Yep. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about all the above, focusing on guns, gun culture, and the like. Mister Peel to Heaven, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, actually, there's a few kind of ideas I've been swirling around in my head over the last couple of years here about gun culture and the direction it's going in. And I think I'm kind of settled on three categories of what it's been in the late 20th century, early 21st century. And I would kind of categorize that as the gun culture 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. I would define, I guess, 1.0 as being kind of your FUD boomers. I've got a shotgun. That's all you really need. Yeah, 357 Magnum, and going to the range and just doing like cowboy shoots and bullseye. Shooting and popping cans at the range. And then I think you kind of shortly after the global war on terrorism starts, you've kind of got your GWAT gun culture 2.0. You see kind of a lot of bro vet influencers rise at this time. You have a lot of self-defense training schools that start popping up, guys that, are just getting off the battlefields in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're eager to kind of capitalize off of that in the civilian market and market that to civilians. Kind of think something along the lines of Tim Kennedy and his, what is it, a sheepdog thing. And then you have, and the aesthetics are a little bit better than gun culture 1.0. Guys are actually like kind of moving and shooting. They're kind of doing some early kind of drills, but it's not quite where it is today. But today, what I would call your gun culture 3.0, it's got some problems. You got cooler guns, you've got cooler equipment, but the people are terrible. Uh, you have this kind of broad coalition of, it seems like Lobetarians, furries, troons, uh, like literally maybe some of the worst people that have kind of like made a coalition representing the Second Amendment. And it's problematic because I'm going to call some names out here. You have guys like Firearm Coalition Policy, and they've done some good stuff, but you can't say anything negative about certain groups not being able to arm themselves. They're fine with tankies and troons arming up. And I think what we're starting to see is we're kind of seeing that mindset now kind of fade with the recent, I guess you could say, string of shootings over the last, I don't know, maybe 2 to 3 years that seem to be a certain group of people that they really can't have firearms because they're seriously mentally ill. And when you give them this uh, privilege and right in the United States, the first thing they do is they start training, they start equipping themselves, and then they go off and murder Christian children. So that's kind of like the three categories I see right now in America. And there could be a possible shift, I think, with a more broader heritage American, like what does the Second Amendment really mean to an American? Is it unlimited firearms that, you can have everyone and anyone, 15 convicted felons have a firearm, the troon that's getting his genitals chopped off, or if is it something that is a responsibility of heritage Americans that we safeguard this right and this privilege we have in the United States to a more measured response. So I'm going to kind of kick that back to you there, Lee.
Yeah, it's a timely question because as the sentiment and the demographics of the country shift broadly, the everyday person's understanding and consensus about what the Second Amendment means uh, can go down the wrong path, and you start running into, like you mentioned, you have like furries and troons and all these weird kind of deviant subcultures and that type of thing, showing an interest in 2A stuff. And this is, of course, like the John Brown Gun Club and these types of organizations. They're all loosely aligned on the far left, Antifa side, that type of thing. And the waters start to get a little bit muddy because you shift away from a discussion about what it means to have rights and liberties under, maybe a tension between like Protestant Enlightenment thinking uh, and like a more modern secular humanism leaning thought, where you get like Reddit morality, where you start to have to lean and consider more the distinction between friends and enemies, uh, rather than just a unified vision of like, hey, the right to keep and bear arms is maybe a man's obligation or a man's duty, not just like a consumer hobby, because a man has an obligation to like protect his household or provide for his family or serve his country or something like that. That doesn't reconcile with like left wing terrorism or globalism or any of that type of thing. And so there's a big impulse and like knee jerk reaction by people who are pro 2A to just blindly say, no, 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 this has to be everybody. This of course means illegal aliens, and this of course means, deranged lunatics and this type of thing, because any type of restriction on this would be totally insane, and outside of bounds with like historical tradition and that type of thing. But I think it's maybe worth considering, like the hour is late, so to speak. Like what time is it? These people do not see gun ownership as in the same way that some of us might, and in fact, their only interest in this is just overt hostility and an end of either political violence or a complete and forceful rejection of any type of sense of order being imposed upon them by even like popular sovereignty, even through something like voting or something like that. So it's a real tricky thing, because on one hand you do have to be careful and you have to be prudent in any situation where you may be asked to cede a little bit of liberty or freedom or something like that, or impose some type of restraint on someone else. You can't enter into this thinking lightly. Um, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you can't think about it and you can't weigh it, and that there may not be times where that's necessary. I mean, there are places on the earth that are full of violence and guns, and there's no Second Amendment concept at all. Like it is possible for some places to just be a violent shithole, and if you do not gatekeep and safeguard and keep the concept of like the Second Amendment in keeping with more traditional sentiment, you run the risk of looking like an idiot who's just saying, well, I think everybody who is a deranged lunatic should have full access to, the machine guns and things like that, because we're starting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I would actually like to kind of add to that a little bit there. So you have like you brought up countries that they're full of firearms, and they have no constitutional right in their country, or they might even have a law saying you're not allowed to own firearms. But a country like Venezuela or Haiti or some piss country in the Middle East or uh, where in Africa, owning firearms is not the same as Americans owning firearms, because we're using them in a different. We understand the gun as I'm going to use a term that gets tossed around a lot as more of a tool. This is something I carry. Like for example, I carry to church. Um, those seem to be pretty hot targets for leftists, but we're not using our firearms to capitalize and have a monopoly on violence in our society and our culture as as free independent Americans owning firearms. Now it's say Venezuela. I mean, if everybody's got a firearm, it's not that old argument. Is like, well, we just need more guns and that'll bring crime down. Like that argument doesn't actually hold any water at all, because when you look at the third world, they have plenty of guns and they have much more firepower than the average American does a lot of times with the kind of guns or weaponry that they're allowed to somehow obtain. whether it's RPGs or uh, like black market military surplus stuff from different wars that have happened in the region. There's no even if there are restrictions from the government saying you can't own these certain things, it's still allowed and there's still nothing done. So it's I think that's like a bad kind of old argument where it's like, well, if everyone has a firearm, then crime will go down. I mean, everyone in the hood has almost a firearm and is crime down. So I really think that the fundamental thing starts boiling back down to what kind of people have the firearms and how are these people using the firearms and what kind of training are they doing with the firearms. I mean, someone like Antifa, they have no loyalty to the United States and they have no loyalty to the Constitution. They have no loyalty to a Protestant work ethic that built the country, where we value life. I mean, even you look at, yeah, our sidewalks. We have sidewalks in our neighborhoods, right? Uh, like in the third world, they don't have sidewalks. You just walk on the road. That's like a Protestant work ethic idea right there, where it's like, oh, we value life. We'll give people sidewalks to walk on so they don't get hit by traffic. But we have the same thing with our firearm culture here too, that it's like, oh, we don't just carry guns irresponsibly. If you're a concealed carry holder or if your state allows, a constitutional carry or whatever, uh, there's a lot of guys that put a lot of time in at the range, training, uh, running drills, being responsible about it. And I know that's kind of like a democratic coded word, responsible gun ownership. But the way that they're using is not the same way that a lot of us are kind of viewing this now as, there's groups in our country that are no longer part of the populace and the citizenry. They might be able to vote, they might be, they might act and look a little bit like Americans, but they don't even hold the same values anymore. It's the what is it, the Scott Adams, like you've got, two different people watching a movie kind of deal. So that's kind of like what I see with this, I guess, this current rise of the the leftists owning firearms. I mean, I see lots of Marx. If you go on Reddit, you'll see tons of Marx quotes about firearms and not giving them up, and it's just revolutionary kind of mindset. They're using the Second Amendment against us now. Is I think that's where we're heading to, and I don't think libertarians are, either they're stupid, and that's probable, or they just don't care and they think that they're buying into this old kind of like cliche argument about like more firearms means safer communities, and it really doesn't at the end of the day, because it's who's possessing those firearms is whether or not it's a safer community.
Yeah, everyone usually, like, the common popular definition of the state is, whatever has the authority or the monopoly on violence. And yeah, fine, like that's an acceptable definition, I think. However, the reason that, like, the state would have the righteous monopoly on violence is because ostensibly they have the monopoly on what is like the correct moral outlook, right? Like if this is the entity that is, chosen through, voting, and therefore, like their authority is derived from the consent of the governed, so therefore their monopoly on violence is justified. It The idea that therefore everyone owning a firearm or having access to firearms, that type of thing, would lead to a safer and more stable society starts to fall apart when there is no monopoly on morality in this process, where you have large groups of people who don't share any type of similar worldview as people that live 20 feet away from them, right? Like obviously, political violence. There's been an uptick this year, especially in recent weeks. Obviously, with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, attacks on churches. This is, it's a difficult topic to approach right now, because again, people do have to be careful. You don't want to quickly say like, oh, well, we should make some like hasty knee jerk decisions about this that will cost certain portions of what is an American birthright. But you also have to weigh that against the fact that many tens of millions of people who are here are not American, and tens of millions of people who are here who are Americans on paper do not buy into this understanding of what it means to live in an ordered society, or to live in a society with liberty, or even why the Second Amendment, would lead to a more peaceful society rather than a more violent society, right? Like you mentioned, places that have a lot of gun violence, like the Hood, or like countries like Mexico is a good example. Mexico has pretty strict anti-gun laws, but the country is operated by a militant drug cartel. South Africa has very restrictive private gun laws, but everyone knows how that is playing out right now. So the idea that everyone having access to firearms will create a more peaceful, more ordered society with more individual liberty really does only work if these people are bought into the same moral vision of what it means to live with liberty, right? And of course, older definitions of this usually suggest that it's free from like being arbitrarily interfered with by other men, right? It's a way to live according to God's will without arbitrary interference from the government or from other men or something like that. It's the ability to live and do what's right. It's not necessarily the ability to shoot anyone who doesn't want you to dress up in like a weird fetish dog suit and hump each other in the park next to the playground, right? Like you cannot have a society where those two competing visions both have access to battle rifles and have something that it like represents stability. That will not work. That will immediately fall apart. And the other constraint on this, the other point of friction, just to change gears a little bit, is that the firearms industry as a whole is very much driven by consumer sentiment, and a consumer mindset towards gun ownership allows what was previously and correctly viewed as a duty or an obligation owed by the American rifleman to his family or his community or his country, the obligation to like protect your home or provide food on the table or to be self-reliant. When this becomes just a consumer thing, it becomes masturbatory. It's you've got guys who have rifles leaned in the corner of their room, and it's basically like a vestigial organ reminding them of a way of life that used to exist. And it's just like a mocking imitation of what it once was. And so you have this situation where modern consumptive behavior has separated the idea of duty accompanying a right. Those two things are now separated, and that only leads to bad outcomes and erosion of a social order. This is what we get for that type of like optimization brain, where we filter out the bad stuff, like duties and obligations, from stuff that's fun, like big guns and powerful bullets and shit like that. And we see this with more than just guns, of course, but that is another factor as well. It's not just the cultural divide between people who are basically insane versus not insane, but there's also that erosion of the understanding that firearms are a right in the sense that they are also a duty and an obligation. It's not just something that's like fun to post on Instagram.
Yeah, there's a if you've read the book Albion Seed, it talks about a lot of the Puritans and the Cavaliers, and a lot of the founding fathers kind of had this view as well, called ordered liberty, and that's how they really viewed liberty initially. Was that there was kind of this order of operations that existed within a community on what they agreed upon, and liberty wasn't necessarily libertinism, but it was actually what is good for the collective group of people. Now, that's not saying that we need to just go ahead and round up ARs or anything like that, because I mean, I've got an AR leaned up in my corner as well, along with other firearms, but it was something that was viewed as, this is good for the community. This is why we have this thing. This is all because it's good for the community, and the community agrees upon this ordered liberty and this idea of this ordered liberty. It's good for the individual family man as well. in the broader, small micro culture that existed. And we don't really have this anymore. I know there's gun clubs and stuff like that that exist on the right, but it's kind of strange over the last couple of years that a lot of your more popular gun clubs that are popping up, uh, they're they're generally leftist, actually. And I'm a member of a outdoor gun range. It's a private club. It's mostly run by boomers. They do have some tactical bays that you can go shooting at and stuff like that. But uh, the boomers have controlled the the gun club industry for so long that it's become impossible as a millennial or a zoomer to actually um, do the style of shooting that you want to do, whether it's like 3 guns or 2 gun matches, without them absolutely like falling out of their rocking chair and saying, "You're shooting too fast there, Sonny." Um, but the leftists, on the other hand, they have no problem actually training tactics, gearing up. They're like cosplaying Les Miserables as like the little revolutionaries. They're actually taking the Second Amendment serious, while I think that a lot of guys on the right are beclowning themselves. And I'm not saying the Ascendant Right or Heritage American Right. I'm saying just more generally the right. That they kind of view the Second Amendment as almost a toy now, and it's, I've got 15 PSAs in my gun safe, and I've got a Punisher skull on the back of my dually diesel, and I've got a yard sign that says we don't call 911. And like that's their that's a lot of guys on the right. That's their view of the Second Amendment, and it's this kind of weird clownish idea of what the Second Amendment was intended for. It was intended that men were able to protect themselves on the frontier against savages and the natives that existed out there. Also, it was a means to put food on the table. It was also a means because you had a militia at the time. You look at the regulators. I think Bagby has done some stuff on the regulators in the last year, but it was this idea that you had an obligation not only to put food on the table for your family, you had an obligation to also defend your family, and you had an obligation if the state required that you would show up for duty. I mean, and you showed up to duty with your rifle, your musket. That was just expected that you had that already. It wasn't, Uncle Sam, here's your M4A2. There you go, you're good to go, and we're gonna send you to the range, and you're gonna shoot pop-up targets at 75, 100, and 250 and 300. Like that was not their idea of what a regulated militia was, or uh, what it meant to actually serve the state and use that monopoly of violence against uh, either foreign powers or domestic threats in your region. So I don't know if you want to say anything to that there.
Well, there is the effect. We saw this during COVID. We saw this during the George Floyd riots, where there are tremendous transgressions against public order or individual rights that are not necessarily met with any type of armed resistance. In fact, sometimes the opposite, where you have guys who are, maybe ostensibly like adjacent to conservative or right wing or any type of any politics like that, where they show up uh, in full kit to make sure that the police don't stop BLM from like looting or something like that, right? It's like, oh no, we're here, as allies to make sure that the state does not stop the freedom of assembly or this type of thing. And this is more like the libertarian, like Boog Boy phenomenon of a few years ago, where it's like, oh, well, we're going to ally with like BLM. We're going to ally with the LGBT community. We're going to ally with, you know, basically everything that should purely go against every survival and political instinct that you have because of some misdirected, tension against the government, COVID was an eye opener for a lot of people, myself included, and I live in a state where it basically was fine, but in a lot of states, especially blue states, uh, you had really ridiculous things taking place, and it became very obvious that the best way to avoid having to deal with the concept of the Second Amendment as an opposing factor to tyrannical policymaking is to just do stuff really slowly or through like a distributed network of a bureaucracy, right? Like rather than sending the National Guard or Antifa to the equivalent of like Concord Bridge or something, you just pass a series of executive orders or activist judicial decisions, sweeping federal mandates from NHS or something like that, and you can actually kind of cheat code your way past the Second Amendment, right? Like when there's not one person or one small unit to shoot at, it actually becomes very difficult to engage it using the Second Amendment, right? And we've seen that with, of course, like the last 40, 50, 60 years of progressivism just being this faithless blob, right? Like the entire Biden administration was an auto pen. The 2020 election was clearly like fraudulent. And it's difficult to use the Second Amendment against these things because there's nothing to shoot at. It's not a embodied thing that is directly confronting you on your property. This is not, you can't say don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes, because there's not one person doing this, right? It's distributed, and it's bureaucratic in nature, and it's very slow moving. So any type of aggressive response seems disproportional, and there's a social cost of being the guy who spazzes out over what people perceive as like a slower or distributed or non-specific policy change. And so you saw things during COVID and during these George Floyd riots and all this type of thing that you would not necessarily have thought were possible. Telling people they can't go out into their front yard and plant a garden, or that they can't attend their father's funerals, or these horrible atrocities, carried out by these blue state cadre of lunatics. And so everyone kind of looked at that and said, well, that's weird. There's like 300 million or 500 million or however many million guns in this country. Why isn't anything taking place? And that's why there's, what are you going to do about that? Right? Like, unless you actually have something that you can engage, there's a problem, just even practically. And I'm not saying this as like a call for political violence. I don't condone any type of, anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying that it was kind of an eye-opening thing where it's like, oh, well, this, what people regard historically almost as like a security blanket, just saying, oh, well, everyone has 2A and the right to arms, and all these guys are armed, and these are, tough conservative guys. I'm sure they'll cowboy up and do something. Well, we can't rely on that because it didn't happen, right? And how could it have happened? Okay, that's kind of a separate question, but it didn't happen either way. And so not only did it not happen, but now the idea that it could happen is very obvious, very obviously flawed, and has shifted in this direction of kind of being like a Redditor hobby for oddballs and libertarians and FUDs and things like that. No one who's actually going to use this anything close to the originally intended purpose. And if they do, it's probably going to be towards some type of left-wing terrorism, right? Or it's just something that people do as purely as like a hobby for the aesthetic and for the experience, and it's divorced from any concept of like duty or obligation. So it's difficult. It's a difficult situation. It's a tricky thing. People like to write it off and say, oh, LOL, it's gay, whatever, it's over, bro. That's not where I'm coming from. Like, I don't mean to sound black-pilled on it or anything like that. But times have shifted in terms of the way that it's considered acceptable to behave or acceptable to view these things. And so it's a difficult conversation to have now.
Yeah, there was actually it made me think of a quote there from Grapes of Wrath, when the Okies are kind of just squatting down and they're all thinking about what they're going to do, and one of them is wondering like, who do I need to talk to as like the bulldozers are coming and just knocking down their homesteads out in Oklahoma. And he's like, well, I'll talk to the sheriff about it. And it was like, well, the sheriff doesn't really have any kind of control over it. And he's like, I'll talk to the city council. And he's like, yeah, he doesn't really have any control about it either. And it's like, well, who do I got to talk to? And it basically is like, well, the banks. And he's like, well, who's in charge of the banks? And they're like, well, not really anybody, actually. Um, it's like a bunch of people and they're far away and you don't know who they are. They're like a faceless entity. It's like this monster that just devours everything. There's not actually you can't point to one person. It's not like the George Soros is the boogeyman all the time for everything. I mean, his funds contribute to that sort of thing, but it's not necessarily one guy. It's multiple entities that exist in our, deep state government apparatus that have shifted. Really, they've changed how we view things as men in our society. It's no longer, hey, I'm just going to go take care of this problem here in town and we'll handle this. There's no one to really appeal to. There's no authority that you can appeal to. I mean, if you live in a blue state, are you going to tell your sheriff that, hey, I don't like this lockdown right now, so we should be open? Well, no, it's not really the sheriff that's doing that. Well, the governor? No, not. I mean, he's kind of part of the problem, but it goes all the way up to the like this blob cathedral administration that was in the background just creating policies, and blue state governors were just going along with it. There wasn't anything that anybody could actually do about solving the problem. And you had guys kind of prior before COVID. I don't really hear this anymore. They would say something like, well, if the government really does something, at least we got the Second Amendment. And it's like, people that say that now, you're just like, ooh, that's, they're cutting off the genitals of children. They locked you in your home for like 2 years. They're trying to force you to get an experimental shot or like make you lose your job. Like, what do you mean if the government tries to do something? We've got the Second Amendment. Like that doesn't even like, do you not hear yourself say that out loud? It sounds so like hokey and corny that that actually means anything to the government, because one, they still have the monopoly on violence when Democrats are in charge. For whatever strange reason, when Republicans are in charge, they don't seem to actually be able to have that monopoly on violence. The FBI doesn't seem to do their job. The uh, certain like administrative branches, whether it's our law enforcement at the federal level, kind of just seem to just slow roll everything, make excuses. But January 6th, we're like kicking doors down at like 2 a.m. in the morning to like drag some granny out of Kansas out of her home because she paid for a coffee at a Starbucks. I mean, like what? That's the thing. The right has this idea, and it's like a fake security. It's like, well, we've got the guns, and it's like, well, guess what? The left has the guns too. And not only do they have the guns, but they actually have organizations that specialize in violence to use it against you, to use those guns. Like you and your 15 PSAs that you have, yeah, that's not going to do anything. Your 50,000 rounds of 5.56, 55 grain that you've got in your basement that you're hoarding, yeah, that's not going to do anything either. Like it's kind of like lunacy to think that. I think it's a crutch or something like that. Like it makes people feel safe, at least in the 2A space. It's like, well, I've got, you know, 40,000 rounds of 5.56 and I've got, 15 PSAs. And that's kind of the way that they're like, well, I'm good. The government can't get me. It's like, yeah, they can. They can just like an entire SWAT team can roll up on your door at 2 a.m., throw a flashbang, and then shoot you in your front yard. Like that happens. So I mean, it's created this like false dichotomy of like, oh well, I'm good, I've got firearms. It's like, nah, that's not really what it's all about. Um, and just changing gears just a little bit here. I don't remember with the Antifa riots back in 2020, 2021 timeframe, that they were actually pulling off. I mean, they're pulling crappy handguns off of these guys. I mean, they're pulling Canics off. That's kind of all right, whatever, in high points. But I don't remember seeing as much where they're actually arresting guys in these protests in blue states and very blue cities that are packing heat at these protests from Antifa. So they're showing up to these things armed, which I'm pretty sure is illegal. One, it's an illegal gathering, but they're also violating their city laws and their state laws as well. And I'm kind of curious to see what kind of direction that would go. And then another kind of a more bigger fear that's kind of I've been thinking about here lately is that what happens if we get one of these protests and one of those Antifa members actually starts firing from the crowd towards Bortak or ICE, and ICE has to respond with lethal force to take the threat out, and then you have some collateral damage, like some kind of Kent State thing. I don't know if you've kind of thought about that lately. I'm sure the administration's thinking about something like that as uh, they've kind of been tracking this thing.
Yeah. I think the conditions for some type of like you said, Kent State or some similar outcome are right, because these people, like, obviously the left understands that they're not going to strictly enforce the law against the guys that are on their own team, right? You see this everywhere, that guns, in places like Illinois or New York, where guns are very heavily regulated in terms of American law, but there's basically no consequence for getting caught with an illegal firearm, compared to what, from a statutory standpoint, should exist. They're not going to enforce this in these blue states, because the people who are out there from Antifa or the John Brown Gun Club or whatever, the National Lawyers Guild, or whoever's out there behaving badly, is not going to face repercussions for that, because that's an authorized activity, right? So if there is a situation where, like, Bortak or ICE or HHS or something is forced to defend themselves, and it results in, like, a loss of life or something along those lines, I don't know. I mean, all bets are kind of off at that point. I'm not a big I'm actually not, like, a big American Civil War like theorist guy. I don't. It's not to say that it couldn't happen, and it's obviously happened before. I just don't. I don't know. I'm not as quick to just think of that as, like, the default escalation as some others. Um, so I think that, let's say that happens, and I hope that it does not. But if that does happen, it's almost just as likely that the GOP loses its nerve, rather than saying, "Hey, look, we're in the right here, and so this is what happens," because that is part of the risk. Like, if you look at this stuff in terms of what the ethical path is, uh, the Second Amendment, again, and the individual gun ownership as a security blanket, like you said, it is a problem in the sense that it gives an unwarranted sense of, well, if all else fails, I could do this. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, man. Maybe there's some room in between doing nothing at all and getting involved, like becoming fully enveloped in a shootout with, like, a team of federal agents or something. Like, maybe there's, like, a couple steps between that, where maybe you actually get involved in local politics, or do something that is productive to a political end, to shift actual, like, practical policy and that kind of thing. And I know that that's, like, not a very cool answer, and everybody wants to hear something that's, like, a lot more edgy and that kind of thing. But realistically, that's part of why the Second Amendment, to an extent, is a cope, is because it's like, yeah, man, why don't you actually do something? Like, there have been tremendous, huge cultural and policy shifts just in the first couple months of the Trump administration, right? Like, we're talking about things uh, openly. Policies are being implemented. Executive orders are going into effect. We're seeing legal victories that were unthinkable 5 years ago, 10 years ago. So there is a big shift in the correct direction, and of course, like, victory is not assured, and that kind of thing. Uh, but that's the other danger of having, like, this nuclear option of just saying, well, fuck it, I'll just go out in a hail of gunfire or something. That's a retarded plan. Like, that should not be something that you take comfort in as like a fallback option. Um, like, that's probably an avoidable outcome, and there's probably a lot of steps that you could take between listening to this right now and that being like the final outcome, that just require a little bit of like courage or a little bit of discipline or a little bit of risk taking, uh, between then, that could assuage that from actually taking place. So, again, I know that that's not like the coolest thing to say, right? It's not as cool as just saying just fuck it, hail of gunfire or whatever. But that's not like a serious response, and that's why the Second Amendment uh, as a security blanket is dangerous, because you're not actually any safer under a security blanket. You're just under a blanket. Right? That's why it's like silly when kids have something like a security blanket. It's like you're actually like, this blanket isn't going to stop you from getting eaten by the fucking monster that's in your closet. You just feel better while it's on. And in reality, if you actually got out from under the security blanket and shined a light on it and saw that there's nothing to be afraid of, if you actually take some practical steps to confront this, it's not that big of a deal at all. That's, I think, the actual lesson with this stuff is that, like, look, man, you would have to be foolish to think, well, I guess if posting about it anonymously on the internet didn't solve this problem, the only thing left to do is get gunned down by a fucking SWAT team. Like, that's a silly way of thinking, and it's not going to work for like our guys, because people on this side and in this part of Twitter, by and large, like, these are like ethical, like religious people who are not prone to like random bouts of senseless violence. This is something that like a insane person would default to, and that's why we see this being something that they do, right? Like, left-wing terrorism is something that insane people do because they are insane. It is not a sensible way of solving a problem in your community. And it's not to say that you can't deal with those people severely, and that they should be dealt with by like a correct and ethical and righteous government action. And that can be violent if necessary, but these things have to be implemented correctly. There's no other way to go about it that would be correct. And so you have to remember, like, yeah, 2A is cool, and it is good to be able to protect your home, and it's good to be able to go hunting, and it's good to be able to serve your country, and it's good to do all these things, because these are obligations that men should live up to. However, there are some steps between going to the gun, if you actually want to solve a problem, that people should consider. Again, I don't mean this as a black pill. I don't think that this means that the Second Amendment is useless or that it has failed. I just mean that it's silly thinking to go from, well, I've tried nothing, I guess now I just have to get really violent about it. Like, that doesn't work, and it doesn't work as a cope. It doesn't work as a security blanket. So there are steps that people can take, and we're seeing some of this through the current swing and evolution in like right wing politics, and that needs to continue. The pressure on that needs to continue. Involvement in that needs to continue. There's unlimited work to be done with that. But I see that more as like a white pill and something to be optimistic about, rather than something to write off. Uh, but people have to realize, like, hey, if I'm under a security blanket, I need to figure out why I feel this is a security blanket, and be honestly critical of that. And that might mean having to have some difficult conversations about the idea of like 2A being for everyone, or that type of thing.
Yeah, there's actually reminded me of a story there. It's a little bit of a white pill. So I'm involved in like local county politics, and the some of the GOP members would go frequent a restaurant in town, and we noticed they had a no gun sign up there, and but people went there. It was a good restaurant. And what we eventually did is we asked to talk to the owner and say like, hey, why do you have that sign there? Because we're actually thinking about, instead of meeting here, we're just going to take our business somewhere else. And if we meet here once a week at this time, and you say you got 20 something people in your party every single week that's coming in there, uh, the owner started to think, well, that's 20 people, that's, times 52. They're here, most times, most weeks. Okay, I'll take it down. And that's like something really easy that you could do, where it didn't even actually require a law being passed. It just required a simple conversation with the owner of that business. Now, not all owners are going to do something like that, but he kind of got the message and was like, yeah, okay, well, I like these people. They questioned me about this. I didn't have a very good answer why I had the sticker up on my door for no firearms, no knives, and whatever it is, the no shoots, no shoes, no shirts, no service kind of thing. And like that was a very easy diplomatic way to solve a problem that you weren't allowed to take a firearm in. Now you can kind of expound upon that and say like, okay, like in my state, I want to have constitutional carry. We're in North Carolina. It's not passed. But the way to do that is you got to get involved in local politics. You've got to get involved at your county level. You've got to get guys in your state reps, in your capital, your state capital, to start pushing this idea. If you want certain things to change with the gun laws in your state, it's not, like you said, it's not going to be like, I'm just going to go shoot it out with the feds right quick and this will solve it. I think sometimes libertarians have this like wet dream fantasy that that's how it's all going to end for them, but I've noticed a lot of them aren't married, they don't have kids, they have kind of jobs that they hate. But for us guys in this sphere that actually care about prosperity and like our children and our family and our wives and that stuff, that like that's just not an option. That you're like, yes, I want the feds to show up to my house at 2 a.m. In the morning when my kids and my wife are asleep, so I can have a battle with them. Like that's just like like absolute nonsense, and like it's lunacy. So like that's not an option, and it's stupid and retarded and foolish. But I mean, libertarians think that way because they're kind of accelerationist and they want some kind of weird like Mad Max anarcho world that exists where there'll be a warlord of furries or something. I don't know. But there are ways to actually change policy in your county. I mean, and the people that you don't want to have guns, yeah, felons that have been convicted multiple times, you can get legislation on the books to say like, hey, I don't want these people actually possessing firearms, like not in my state, not in my community. We need to throw the entire book at them. You need to make sure that your DAs actually understand. Like I've met my DA multiple times now, being in politics. That hey, I don't know if Stalin said it or whoever said it, but it's that old saying that's like, for my friends, or for my enemies, the law, and for my friends, everything. Like, if you know your sheriff and you know your DA, if you got in an accidental shootout because some thug was trying to carjack you or something like that, and you wasted him on the sidewalk, like, do you have the confidence that you know that your county wouldn't throw the entire book at you? Or are you kind of like, I don't know how they would treat that? So like I know in my county, I'm good. I've talked to the sheriff about this kind of thing, about, stand your ground, self-defense, and that's not something that they would want to target the American citizens in this county for doing something. But at the same time, I want them to throw every single possible law that is available at somebody that is an outgroup person. I want them to be locked up, be in just covered in legal work that they have to do. I want them in jail. I want it as hard as possible for them to actually get their life back together. And I know some people get squirmish about that. It's like, well, everybody makes a mistake or something like that. It's like, yeah, I don't like, I've never been in the situation where I was like walking down the street and was like, I think I'm going to go carjack that old lady and steal her purse. That like a lot of these kind of like you can get accidentally arrested. It does happen, but for the most part, what we're talking about is that we want bad guys punished, but not just punished a little bit where they get a slap on the wrist and then they get back out and they keep doing the same crazy stuff, but to actually get like punish them where you are actually removing certain rights that they are no longer privileged to have. And like that's not a very cool answer. Again, like you were saying, it's not cool to say like, yeah, I'm going to go to my county GOP meeting and I'm going to start like meeting the DA. I'm going to meet the sheriff. I'm gonna start meeting city council. We're going to start talking to restaurants about like, hey, we don't like that you have a no gun sign up here. We're not going to patron you anymore unless you take that down. Like that's not the cool stuff. Like, but that's the necessary stuff in order to get from point A to point Z. Like all those little things in between to get to like a better, more functioning society where people understand rights and privileges and God-given rights that are that we understand are granted by our Constitution. You don't get the Constitution doesn't get restored if you don't do all those little things in between. It doesn't go from I'm angry, violence, and then we've reset. Like it doesn't work that way. It starts looking like South Africa is what it starts looking like. And I'm not an accelerationist or anything, so that's not something that I'm kind of thinking about where I'm like, oh yeah, we just need it to get really bad, and then people will all wake up. It's like, probably not. They won't. Like, I think that if you did have Antifa fire some shots at ICE, hit an agent, and agents responded back with firepower and killed a couple of protesters, I think it would completely take the wind out of the sails of the GOP. And I think, unfortunately, too many grill Americans are just retarded enough to actually be sympathetic towards protesters along the lines of something like a Kent State incident, where they'd be like, well, this is really bad. And like the violence, it's both sides now. The left would have their martyrs. So like that's should avoid any of that happening, which is why like this thing shouldn't be allowed to continue to fester. I mean, the thing is like wrap these guys up before they get out on the protest. You know who they are. They're the same people that keep protesting. They travel and they do this kind of thing. So round up as many as you can with uh, the intel that you have before they even get out on the scene and start causing problems. But that's really all I kind of have on that. I didn't know if any of the other guests wanted to say anything.
Yeah, I suppose not. Kev, did you have anything?
No. I had to make sure I was unmuted. Yeah, we're coming close to the bottom of the hour. Lee, do you have anything that you would like to add or chill or plug before we wrap up for the night?
No, not really. I think my main point is just that the appeal to heaven concept is as appealing as that sounds to people. Just remember that there's it says when there's nothing else that you can do, then you can appeal to heaven. It's not there's work to be done. The current administration is making good headway. People need to keep pushing that and stay plugged in with that and doing things maybe at a local or state level. It's the common sense thing to do. The Second Amendment is worth preserving, but you do need to think critically about whether you're wearing it as a security blanket or seeing it as a duty and an obligation that you will live under.
There's actually a question I want to answer real quick here by Infernal. He said, how do you initiate a conversation like that with your county sheriff? All right, so I'm going to try to shorten this answer a little bit here. So one, you got to get involved in local politics. I'm lucky that in my county, it's a Republican sheriff. I am a Republican delegate. I can actually talk to my county sheriff at the delegate meetings that they have. Usually it's a once a month. And they're usually there at most kind of events that the party holds. So you just kind of like get to know these guys because you're there all the time. You run into him. You say, hey, how does the county feel? How does the sheriff's office feel about this? And just start kind of probing. Like, be smart about it. Don't like walk up and say like, so let's say I just like waste some hood rat that was trying to carjack me, and spilled his brains out on the street like American History X. Like, no, you don't be tactical about how you approach those questions with your sheriff still, but be able to say, hey, like, what is the general policy that if I had a self-defense situation, what would the outcome for me look like? How does the department feel about such things? And you can kind of start to gauge what he feels, um, on the Second Amendment and on the stand your ground laws, and the right to self-defense. And if you've got a good Republican sheriff that is actually plugged into the community, he's going to be on your side. If you don't have a good sheriff and he's on the opposite side of the aisle, well, you've got a lot of work to do. That you've got a lot more problems than worrying about a stand your ground law or how they're going to handle you in a self-defense situation. So that's going to be something that you're going to have to actually retake your county if possible. So, and that's a lot of other steps you're going to have to do. That's going to be organizing with your friends. You're not even thinking about the Second Amendment anymore on that thing. You're thinking about, how do I take my county back from these lunatics? So that's kind of the short answer of things. Like, so hopefully your sheriff's a Republican. Hopefully you can get involved in local county politics, and you can kind of like start building that friendship with your DA, with your sheriff. And also that's good for you too, because if anything ever did happen to you, like, your sheriff knows who you are, your DA knows who you are. So that's cards in your hand right there. So that's all I really had to have to that question there.
All right. Yeah, again, Lee, thank you for joining us tonight. Your X handle link is in the description, along with the other host and myself. If you guys are in North Carolina and you're interested in joining the NGS, our email is in the description, along with the OGCs. Feel free to check out our website, check out our Substack, donate. Also, if you're a fan of Big Tobacco, there is an affiliate app link for the OGC for ALP. And after this stream, go. Link is in the comments. Go to the Old Glory Club and check out the Tippecanoe Society. Sorry, it's a tongue twister for me. But yeah, go check out the chapter house tonight. But yeah, other than that, we'll see y'all later. Have a good night.